Hi guys, welcome to SnipBit, the podcast to show that you can be successful in your chosen field, whatever your background or start in life. And today I'm hugely honoured to welcome Rory Underwood, a former rugby union player. He was England's record international try scorer, scoring 49 tries in 85 internationals. He's also played 236 games for Leicester Tigers, and he and his brother Tony were the first brothers to play together for England since 1937. Rory, welcome to SnipBit.
Pleased to meet you, Hayley. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
You're so welcome. So obviously you've been massively successful in your career. And do you think your background and upbringing have played a part in this?
I think so. I mean, I was brought up in Malaysia in my early life, and all I can remember was spending a lot of time outdoors. Uh, my so you mentioned Tony. We've got a middle brother, Gary, who was 18 months younger than me. So and Tony's 6 years younger than me. So obviously, as kids, that's quite a large gap.
Yeah.
And so pretty much myself and Gary, I mean, my memories of being in Malaysia, we always had a sort of a reasonable sized garden as you do out there, with two goalposts at either end. And we just played one-on-one football non-stop the whole time. And so my memories of just being hot and sweaty and just muddy and, covered in grass stains, from playing after school or whatever. We played at school as well, as you can imagine, are very much for an outdoor life. So my memories of childhood, very much playing sport and being active. And I suppose the one-on-one, oh, we've got to beat your brother, might have had something to do with it. I mean, my dad was into football. He was a football coach, so he coached the school. So when I was at school, he taught us when we were in primary school. And my mum, in her early days at school, was quite a reasonable athlete as well, by all accounts. So I think both of those two helped from the genes point of view, from the nature point of view.
Yeah.
And no doubt, um, playing sport, very much boys, that one-on-one adversarial type, brotherly, competitive nature has something to play a part in it.
See, that's amazing, isn't it? I think just having brothers and having that competitive nature, it gives you so much, doesn't it?
Yeah. And of course, it doesn't have to be brothers. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I've come across many, many, many situations, especially from what I've heard from the rugby side, where, basically, if you're a sister and a brother, well, you make do, or just have to go and quietly sit in the corner somewhere. And sometimes, a lot of the girls, they can play as hard and as well as any of the boys that are growing up, and there's no reason why they can't do what they want to do. And I think, so I've heard plenty of examples of sisters who've grown up with the bangs and knocks of playing with brothers, and learn how to be competitive and hone that sort of ability to overcome what could be a sort of physically better player, and working out ways of how to be able to compete, and get one over the other sibling.
I'm sure there's a lot of cases of that,
Yeah.
definitely. So was there a point in your career that you thought, I really know I'm going to be successful here?
Um, the one that stands out to me was when I think it was 17. I was 17. I mean, I've always been quick. I've always done well athletics. So I've obviously picked up my mum's genes. So I was always very quick. I mean, I regard myself as I'm more of a 30, 60 meter runner than a 100 or 200 meter runner. I'm very quick off the mark, but I can as I keep my favorite comment is saying is anything longer than a rugby pitch is long distance as far as I'm concerned. So, being on the wing, scoring tries, being successful at the age groups as I went through school. But it wasn't, and I sort of played a bit of representative. I was sort of on the bench for the under-16s Durham schoolboys team and various things like that. And it wasn't. I remember I think we were pre-season training before the upper six at school, and then school teacher at the time, John Oates, we were just chatting as we were walking along, and he was one that sort of said, one of these days, Rory, if you put your mind to it, you could play for England.
Wow.
And it was like, what? I mean, up until then, I was just playing sport with my mates at school. I just started playing for Middlesbrough, a local club to Barnard Castle, and it was just a sport we did on the weekend, and I played a few times for a local club. And any thought of playing for England was just sort of not in my psyche. And it wasn't until then that the seed was there. And I didn't mean that I was going to be successful. It was just suddenly that realization that there was I suppose, a possibility, because I hadn't even thought about it. And by the end of upper six, I'd played for Durham schoolboys, and literally within months of leaving school, the following September, I got picked to play for the senior Durham county side. So at the age of 18, I was playing in the senior Durham county side, and then, well, I played at the age of 20. So within 2 years of leaving school, two and a half years of leaving school, I got my first cap for England. Wow. So it's a very rapid, after, from that last year at school, and the next 2-3 years was just a rapid rise.
That's amazing. And it seems that just that teacher putting that sort of seed into your mind, would you say that that's something that really helped you to motivate you, to spur you on to realize your potential?
I think what it did was, up until then, it was, yeah, you wanted to do well, and you wanted to play well, and you wanted to win and enjoy yourself. But it wasn't until that seed went in around the potential to reach the peak of playing in your sport, I suppose it just sort of reset the mind to think, oh, what might be possible?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yes, as kids you play, and you imagine you're the players of the time, you're the players that play rugby at the time, whatever. But 17, I'll be honest, 17, 18, I knew about rugby in the outside of school. I remember watching it on Grandstand in the old days when the Five Nations was on. And it wasn't until the sixth form that I really started to recognise the names of those teams so Clive Woodward, Dusty Hare, Paul Dodge, Peter Wheeler, Bill Beaumont, all those sort of names of that sort of early 80s. I only just started to be aware of those players. And so I can remember when I first started being successful through sixth form, and who were my sort of role models, whatever. It was like, I didn't really have any as such per se, but I sort of recognised that Mike Slemon and John Carton were the two wingers that were playing for England at the time. Both played in the North, both from the Northwest. One played for Liverpool, one played for Orrell. And to me, they were the England wingers at the time. So to me, they were very much that's who I would aspire to be, because that's my position, and they're playing for England at the moment.
And there was a real wealth there of people to aspire to be. And so what would you say has been that driving force behind your success?
It's an interesting question, because any of us, we're all different, and some of us are very much more enlightened as to how our mind works, and a lot of us are like, I don't know how it works, but sometimes it just happens. And there's a lot of that with me. I get people telling me that I just have this quiet determination. I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert. So obviously I tend to not wear my heart on my sleeve as much as some other people. And there's this quiet determination to just get on with it and try and be as good as you can, without a doubt. I mean, that's played a part both in my rugby career as well as my Air Force career. So, the two things played a part as I grew up in my 20s. And I think there's no doubt, when I think back to the time, even when John suggested I could play for England, it wasn't a case of, right, everything I'm to do now is to try and make myself play for England. It was that aspirational thing. I think, oh my God, that is a possibility. Okay. But I still would try to go into every game to play well, to try and win the game, be best, as part of a team and stuff like that. And obviously when you could, you tried to learn. We're at a time when, we did train, but we weren't full time. We weren't professionals. It was, as I described to people when we played rugby, my job was a part of the Royal Air Force, but my hobby was playing rugby.
Yeah.
That's the way to describe it. The only payment I ever got was, I got 12p a mile mileage payment from the RFU whenever I went down to train or play with England. So in the early days, the whole um, you know, what you got out of it was playing for a club, the enjoyment of being part of a team, part of a club, the highs and lows of playing sport. We refer to what happened last night, give people an idea when this was recorded. England winning a semi-final, so that was, for a lot of us, the highs of seeing England getting through to a final, because I was 3 when '66 happened, so I wasn't aware of even football at that time, obviously.
Yeah.
So there are highs and lows to go with it at a club level. And what was interesting is that 2 years, I wasn't planning it. If I really look back and think, what did I plan? It was like, okay, this year I want to try and be able to play for England Colts. That was my first year out of school, which is under 19s. By the end of it, I'd played for England under 23s.
Wow.
So then the following year was solidify myself, because I was 18. So I was like, I'll just solidify myself in the under 23s. And by the next year, I played for England B and was in the England trial. And then sort of solidify that sort of England sort of B type, which would be sort of Saxons or the England A team now. It was then in the following year after that, well, I got selected to play for England. So sometimes you try and plan, and then, expectations and things sometimes supersede it. And, what was that down to? Without a doubt, timing, particular time, me as my attributes and physical attributes, and obviously where I came from playing rugby. And obviously trying to stay there, that's half the challenge, isn't it? Once you get there, it's trying to stay there and maintain the standards you aspire to.
100%. And obviously goal setting was hugely important to you.
It was, and it wasn't, and goal setting from a high level perspective. So it wasn't, things about training and number of tries and tackles. It wasn't into the minutiae like that. It was very much, okay, my aspiration when I left school was to try and get in the England Colt side, and it's that sort of thing, as opposed to, so it was the higher level thing. So I suppose, if you take your uncle's perspective, it's obviously, well, for him it was just how many points I could win and beat the other person by so many. But it was that you got the Olympics every 4 years. For us in rugby until 1987, we had no World Cup. It was club rugby every year. There was the international scene every year as well, the Five Nations. So the aspiration was what level as you went from schoolboys into the senior part of the sport.
So do you think the fact that it's now a professional sport, do you think it changed it in any way, made it better, worse, or different?
Oh, I'm a big believer in sport evolves. There's no doubt. If you take athletics from where it was, when I remember watching it in the '80s to where it is now, it's moved on leaps and bounds. Rugby has done that. You could argue both sports technically in the '80s. Athletics was an amateur sport.
Yeah.
In anybody's definition, and so was rugby. And so both sports have gone through the phase of going through the professional elements of it now. So that makes a massive difference. For me, training was in the evenings and playing on Saturday. Whereas now, obviously, they're full-time athletes. They can train. They've got people who tell them what to eat, how to eat, when to train, how to train, etc., etc., etc. And the amount of knowledge and information they get nowadays is way, 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 way much better than it ever was when I was playing. So when you've got 7 days a week, you're actually being paid to do a sport as a job. Then obviously things have moved on leaps and bounds. There are some of the discussions that lots of things going around, players being bigger, stronger, leaner, and the impact that has on the sport. And that's something that we've got to come to terms with. And as that progresses, obviously science and medical is trying to keep up the pace with things as they move on. And we've got to get the right balance, with these sort of things.
And I think that's really interesting as well, because obviously not being paid for it and it being a hobby, you have to motivate yourself. And so do you think, therefore, then that you had a growth mindset, and how important has that been to you?
Well, I think I did, but it was, when I look back and reflect back at my time, I didn't sit there and sort of, go through phases of sitting there and go, right, I've got to do this. And rugby was part of my life. Training once or twice on Tuesday or Thursday night when I could get away from the Air Force, depends on what sort of day I had. For the whole time in my club career at Leicester, I don't think I travelled less than an hour to get to Leicester training, where I was based and flying. So I could be flying all day, have to jump in the car and drive to Leicester to go training. So, that's a big drain in life. And everybody who's played sport will know that the whole context of having to travel and get to work. And of course, that has an impact. And so it wasn't me sitting trying to drive it. I enjoyed it. It was part of my life. It was very much a balance of my life. So the challenges of trying to fly in the Air Force and having a job, and then being able to get out of your flying suit into your rugby kit and go and throw yourself with gay abandon around a rugby pitch with your mates and have a laugh and a bit of physicality and enjoy the whole freedom of being in the open air and running around. And then obviously I always talk about the triumvirate, then going home and being part of a family,
Yeah.
In the 90s, both my daughters were born in 91. So during the 90s, during that peak period of England's success during the 90s, when we won 3 Grand Slams, got to World Cup final, I was flying around in a fast jet at low level, at the same time as playing rugby for England at that success level. And I had 2 young kids under the age of 3 at home. So, all those things in some ways helped balance. I always look back and you don't become too focused, and there's always a balance to life, and there's always other things that help to manage the whole context of putting things in perspective. I like to think about.
That makes sense. Definitely, it's having that kind of other things to focus on, so it's not too single-minded on one.
Yeah, I've never been one that people can consume of being. Well, it's all relative. To somebody who doesn't play at the highest level, what I did for rugby or flew jets would have been all consuming. But in the relative nature, the fact is I didn't go into rugby and it became all consuming, where I ate, breathed, whatever, just rugby, because there was 3 parts to my life.
Yeah, it's good to have that balance.
Definitely. And I always talk about it because talk about if you get work, you get tired or whatever, you go and run around the rugby pitch and you feel, you get just get the endorphins running around and you feel like better and get in the open air, and whether it's raining or cold or whatever, and you have that camaraderie with a whole different group of people in a rugby setup, which, I'm in a flying world with flying pilots of a certain mentality and mindset, and then you go into this where you've got all shapes of sizes of people and from all different parts of the community and whatever, and it's irrelevant. It's just part of it, but it makes life's rich tapestry of knowing and understanding people. And then you go home and there you are, there's a 2-year-old that's being sick. It's your turn.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah. So there are times when you're sort of having, just scored several tries and you won a game and you're the man of the match, and you go, this will bring you down to earth. Here you go. So those sort of things, and each of them helps from me, my perspective. And I think, having those different elements does, I believe, and obviously well-being and looking after your mental health has a massive part to play. And without a doubt, that ability to those 3 parts of my life, I didn't let the 3 things overswamp me from the big picture, but they did help me from overcoming some of the challenges. Because when you play sport, you have the highs, but you have your lows. You've got to accept that at times, and you've got your lows, and half of the battle is to overcome those lows, whether it's individually or with the help of your teammates.
Yeah. So that leads me on to our next question. What do you think your biggest challenge has been, and how have you overcome it?
Oh, flipping heck. That's a really hard question for me. It's something that when I reflect now, looking back, it's like anything else. When you look back and you have the luxury of hindsight, you can always look back and go, I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd done this. People got to remember, yes, we're playing for our country, whatever, but my Air Force job was what paid the mortgage and put food on the plate for the family.
Yeah.
And so without doubt, the job was the priority. And so playing rugby, there's no doubt I look back and go, I could have probably spent an extra 5 minutes doing that sort of skill. I could have spent another 5 minutes doing that sort of extra keep fit training, or I could have done an extra 5 minutes, you know, thinking about my diet or whatever, which was never as good as it should have been. And you always look back with hindsight, but at the time you didn't. So it's one of the challenges, you know, you're trying to play and be better. And, you know, we lost the final in 1991 in the World Cup final to Australia. And you sometimes have that, what if, you know, I'd done this or done that. It's a very difficult one. I try not to reflect on what might have been, because hindsight is a very dangerous sort of avenue to go down, because it can very quickly destroy if you make it, you know, too much of a big thing. But I suppose the biggest challenge I had along the time was the fact that I had quite a long career. I had 12 years. So how do you maintain that high standards?
Yeah.
How do you maintain it without it becoming without becoming complacent, without becoming run of the mill, without becoming normal, and that sort of stuff, and aspiring. And I always, for me, what I always try to think about, and even with hindsight, I could have done it much better, but I always felt every day was a school day, is that famous saying.
Yeah.
And I always felt that if I got to a stage where I thought I knew everything in whatever I had to do in a skill set, then I would retire, because you never stop learning. You should never have that feeling of, I know it all now, I'm a complete expert, better than everybody else. And I always had that trying in the back of my mind all the time, in trying to overcome that. So you're always trying to learn about what happened in that game, how did it go on, that sort of debriefing mindset, which is something that's very much heavily influenced by my time in the Air Force. So obviously that plays a massive part.
I think, let's be honest, we'd all be geniuses if we had hindsight.
Yes.
It's just an ongoing journey, isn't it, when we're learning and growing all the time?
It is. I mean, and it's using hindsight in the right way. So using hindsight not to castigate yourself, but using hindsight to learn and adapt what you do next time, then that's using the best way possible. Because we all make mistakes. Every single person who has been successful, I guarantee you, has made mistakes along the way. The real true test of a champion is, how do you recognize it in the first instance? Then what do you do with that information? And then how you apply it to make yourself better. Yeah. That in itself is a massive, and that's, you know, it's part and parcel of how you create that resilience, is being able to have that little sort of model in your head as to how we can adapt, because you have to accept it's going to happen, and then what you do about it.
Mm-hmm. So basically taking responsibility and growing resilience, so that next time you don't repeat the same mistakes or the same issues.
100%. You know, it's like anything else. You've got, there are certain things that you have complete control over. There are certain things you've got not complete control over, but you've got some influence over. So those are the two area things you need to concentrate on. Definitely the ones that you control over, do something about, because you can do something about it. Those you've got influence, you may not be able to do it directly, but you can still influence how you can impact that the better. All the stuff that you've got no influence over, you know, people that worry and tie themselves in knots about all that sort of stuff, that's where people come unstuck, because you're worried about stuff that you've got no control over. You know, some people say the press, you know, they you know, at the moment, the press are being fantastic about England at the moment. If we lose on Sunday, you know, we've been there before, the press can turn very quickly. Yeah. And it was this went wrong, that went wrong, and whatever. But yes, you, to a certain extent, you've got no control over the press, but you can influence it and how you work out how you do X, Y, and Z. The one thing that's been interesting is, as I've been listening to all the commentators talk through the England games in the last couple of weeks, is how much Gareth Southgate has really got the young players, and most of them are really young. I mean, that's a young squad we've got going there. It's very promising for the rest of the next few years, is how open they are with the press.
Yes.
So rather than being at us and them and being antagonistic, there's a much more openness about the way they're reporting with the press, which then means that you're influencing the press about how they report on it. It won't say that, they won't say you had a bad game if you had a bad game, but there's no doubt that that has a massive way you can influence the way that the press deal and interact, etc., with you. So there's an example of, you may not have control over the press because you can't,
No.
but you do have the ability to have some sort of influence on them. So therefore, how do you go through that? It's part and parcel. It's just, you know, you look at it, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but you look at Naomi Osaka and the real challenge around the expectations of her with the press, and how she struggled with the thing. And I you know, I've been there. You come off a game and you've just thrashed another side, and you say, "How are you feeling?" You know, "I'm feeling good." You've just been thrashed by 50 points. How are you feeling? Well, what do you think? You know, and it is an unfortunate part of sport, from my mind. It's not an unfortunate. It is an integral part of sport that the press play a part. It is part of the beast that is sport, and how the machinations of public and fans' interest that generates the whole money side of the sport. They're all intricately linked, and trying to be able to cope with all different things has a massive impact in your space, in how you try and be as successful as possible. Now, trying to do it yourself is an interesting challenge, and that's why you see people with lots of entourages to help around. But you know, fundamentally, I think it still boils down to you as the individual. If you're an individual sport, a team sport, there are some little nuanced differences, but fundamentally, it's your own personal responsibility, as you said just now, Hayley. You know, it falls down to you to do something about. And it's like anything else. I don't know what to do about it. Well, then go and find out. Go and ask for help. Go and seek people who are experts in this, and ask them for help. And obviously, you know, the whole context of what you're trying to do with these podcasts is that, speaking to people like us, we're all different. You know, I've got this view, but I'm sure there's another person that was speaking has a slightly differing view, because we're all slightly different.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there are little nuggets that somebody will pick out of it and go, that really resonates with me. I'm going to take that. And for me, anything like that, anybody can grab a little nugget of anything I say or anybody else. It doesn't have to be me, it can be anybody. It doesn't have to be sport, it can be anything in life. Anything that grabs and they like that, take it and run with it.
I think that's the case, because we have so many influences around us, and actually it's picking out the good stuff.
It is, and it's one of the challenges of life. You know, I remember early on in my playing career, you know, you go and play rugby, you're an hour and 20 minutes getting bashed around on an international pitch at Twickenham. You then go and get showered, changed, do a bit of the press, which is never as big as it is now, obviously. Yeah. And then you jump on a coach. You went to drive in the coach. It used to take about an hour and a half to get from Twickenham all the way into Park Lane, because we then had a big, huge formal dinner, yeah. Black tie dinner at the Hilton in Park Lane. And so we're all knackered after the game, exhausted, both mentally and physically. And then we go to a big, huge dinner, and it has got, like, you know, 800 people in the room, with the 22 players and a few management. And then you've got the rest are all obviously, you know, RFU committee allocadoos and all guests of sponsors, and, you know, all the stuff that the RFU try to do with other parts of the, you know, the clubs around the country. And so, of course, every single one of those is coming to meet their star players and want to have their pound of flesh and meet them and talk to them and whatever. And of course, you get lots of people who are obviously trying to offer their thoughts and opinions and suggestions and feedback to you. and when you're a young 20, 21, 22-year-old, you know, and you're brought up in a certain way, you listen a lot and you're courteous, and, you know, you don't tend to turn your back and be rude. But I had one allocadoor come to me, representative from Kent, I remember his name now, and he said, and he, you know, you can see that happening, and he just says, "Look, Rory," he says, "you know, you get lots of people who tell you a lot of what they think about. The real trick is trying to pick the wheat from the chaff and pick out the bits, let the rest of it wash over. But any little nuggets that really work for you, take them and run with it." And it's always lived with me.
And I think that's a really good point, because let's be honest, anyone can sit there being an armchair critic.
Oh yeah.
But how many of them could actually do what you've done on the rugby field?
100%. 100% agree with that. However, one little interesting nugget is that sometimes you pick up a little nugget from somebody who has never played rugby in their life.
Yeah.
So the one thing's about life in general, that's the why things like, you know, what do we do post post sport, we get involved with business or family life, well, it doesn't make any difference. But sometimes that little nugget can come from the strangest, weirdest places.
Yeah.
And if you're not out scanning and just trying to be open-minded, you'll never pick on it. And so sometimes you see people have become very single-minded and focused, and that just everything is around that all-consuming we talked about earlier on.
Yes.
You are potentially missing out on other things that could potentially help. The real challenge is then don't go down the I'll look at everything, because then you get swamped. And that is part of the skills. There are times you need to focus, and there are times you need to go, okay, so what is out there? What can I listen? What can I hear? And sort the wheat from the chaff. And that's hence why it can sometimes be a challenging place when you're trying to play sport at the highest level.
100%. So, what would you like to be remembered for?
Crikey. That's I think very simplistic, because I'm very modest. It's one of my for some people a good trait. For some other people it's not a bad trait, but it's not the best trait. It's not so much, I'm very proud I got my 49 tries and that stuff, and those records are nice there, but at some point they'll be broken. I got a lot. It's quite interesting that I've got a lot of press as Rory Underwood in the last year or two, because Johnny May got to 30, I don't know, low 30s number of tries, and he's the closest one who's still playing to get to my record. But he's still got quite a way to go. And so every time he scores another one, he's got close to Rory Underwood's try record. So my name keeps getting brought up all the time, and I've not played for obviously 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So records are there to be beaten. For me, the fact that people remember me from that era, and remember me as being somebody part of a successful team, who could score tries, and remember some of the tries I scored in just very simplistic terms. That's fantastic, And of course, it is a time thing. There is a certain age group that believe that they've probably never seen me play, and there's a lot of people like that now. I'm 58 now. I haven't put an England jersey on for 25 years. It's frightening how that time has just gone. So if you're under 30, you could argue 35, probably 40, unless your parents were massive into rugby and they took your rugby and showed you lots of videos and talked about stuff, you've probably never ever heard of Rory Underwood. And I can remember somebody was telling me this story about England won the World Cup in 2003. So Martin Johnson lifting up the William Webb Trophy. That's a very well-known photograph in front of the England boys out in Sydney. And the following year, one of our community guys at Leicester Tigers was running some sessions with some young mini rugby players. They were less than 10 or whatever, 7 or 8 or something like that. He was telling me the story, and he was saying, when you do this, remember when Martin Johnson, lifted up the World Cup, and as these kids are going, no. And it was like the year after, but because the year before they probably didn't start playing mini rugby, or they were too young to actually watch, or they watched it, they watched the game but had no idea who the people were and the names or whatever. And so there is that time thing. So yeah, it's I just hope people remember from us just what not so much the impact, but the hopefully what I gave to English rugby and Lions rugby, which is obviously very pertinent moment with the Lions playing in South Africa at the moment.
Yeah.
But I hope that people recognise that I contributed something towards English and Lions rugby.
Brilliant. So if you were stood in front of your teenage self now, with that whole opportunity in front of you, what advice would you give, and why?
There's two things. With my business hat on, understand and go and learn how to network. And it's not from a point of view of what free gizzards can I get and how much money I can make. Networking is a massive part of life. People, build relationships with people, and that's the way the world works. And if I'd done more of that when I was starting out to play, with my ability when I was playing rugby, with all the companies we had, at all the businesses, at all the rugby club dinners, it would have added my benefit when I left. But it was an amateur game. I was going to be a pilot, and I was going to be a pilot till I retired. I had no thoughts of leaving the Air Force and setting up my own business and whatever. But when I look back now, if I'd networked, even if I'd stayed in the Air Force, they would have been beneficial at a later stage. That's the business hat on. Mm-hmm. The rugby hat on, and I would probably apply with my pilot's hat on as well. Just like anything else, I wish when I look back saying that extra 5 minutes training there, the extra 5 minutes to do that skill set, that extra bit, if you just add 5 minutes to every single session you do over a period of time, it'll come up to quite large. So there's always that, when you think you've probably done enough, just go and do another 5 minutes. And, I know your uncle, there's a very famous story, obviously, with him training twice on Christmas Day because he knew that, Jurgen Hingsman wasn't, and he'd do it twice just to make sure even he trained once, he was doing it once more than other. And that sort of individual psychology, that I would have said to myself there, there's always a chance to have increased each of your little skill set by a little incremental bit that would have overall made it better.
I think that's huge, actually, isn't it? That compound effect.
Yes, massively. So that thing that Brailsford talks about with the marginal gains, you just all little minutiae percentages, but actually when you compound them together, it has a massive sort of synergistic type dynamics that come together, and that's been around forever. What Brailsford did was compartmentalize it in a really clear way, and that's playing its part. And for anybody who plays, for me, when I'm flying with other aircraft and other pilots, how we gel together is massive for obvious reasons. And the same with rugby. How 15 guys or girls in their teams, how you meld together has a massive impact on how successful you can be. When I first played for England in the mid-80s, we're an average side. But the forwards did their forward stuff, we did the backs did their back stuff, and we never used to talk to each other because they were big, ugly, and smelly. So that. But what Jeff Cook brought to that team, he was the manager in the late 80s. That built that whole setup and the camaraderie and the stuff that Gareth Southgate has done with the England team now. We've never been in doubt. We've had very talented players, but I think most England football supporters, we just never had what was felt like a good team. And what's different now when I watch it, the game against Ukraine last week, for me, that's one of the best England performances I've seen as a team, both individual skill sets and team skill set, for a long, long time. I was absolute joy to watch. And I think trying to get that, it takes effort. In business, I spend half my life, I go and talk to companies and stuff, and they just assume there's 6 people, there's a problem, there's an initiative, just throw 6 people at it and they will automatically work as a team.
Yeah.
It still needs, you still need to work at working as a team.
Yeah.
And that's what sport has done for a long time.
And I think what Gareth Southgate is doing, kind of Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, that whole book where he talks about bringing in all these different diverse people and different diverse ways of thinking and coming up with a plan. And I think previously, with a lot of sports, we've had a lot of individual brilliance, but no collective bonding between them.
Yeah, and those are the, again, that stuff that's been going on in time immemorial. Certain people come with different ideas, and that's the beauty about us. You go through the situation where you grow from within the whole way. You will always have insular type thinking. You bring from outside. It's no point going completely outside, because then you bring so many hodgepodge things, you never actually get that core of what is good about what you are. So the real trick you're trying to create, which is, if you look at what Eddie Jones has tried to do with the England team in the last 5-6 years he's been involved, is not change what is good about what English players do. It's trying to take that and just add a few little things on the outside that creates that extra bit that takes what's good about what England can do very well and then adds on to it. And that's the same thing, I think, with life, whether it's business, whether it's in the Air Force, and also in life or in sport, anything like that, having the ability to bring things from the outside without swamping the core bit of what you do well will add to that, the core basic element that is very much what brought you to being at a certain level and a certain ability in a certain team or a certain individual. And then all you're trying to do is that eke that top bit. It's like anything else, you know, for those of us who play sport at the highest level, you are in the top 2-3% of people that play. So when you're trying to be even better, you're not talking about improving by 50% because you're in the top anyway. So you're trying to eke out that little bit. So anything that can help on that is going to make a difference.
And it is all about those incremental steps. So I remember my uncle talking about the difference between gold and silver might be 50 points. 50 points over 10 events is millimeters or fractions of seconds. And it's those little wins that are the difference between gold, silver, and bronze.
And so in that situation, you know, if you take it, that's you know, mano a mano. That's you know, your uncle against the other, one of the other who comes second or first, and the uncle comes second. In rugby, you've got 15 players against 15 players. So if you get one player who has that little millimeters, but you need to times it by 15. So if all 15 just have little millimeters, add that together, it becomes a massive difference.
Yeah.
You know, we always talked about in rugby, if you have one player has an off day, the team can cope with it. Obviously harder if it's a real influential player like the fly half or the scrum half. But fundamentally, teams can cope with 1 or 2 players having an off day. By the time you get to 3 players having an off day, it starts to have a detrimental impact to the team.
Yes.
Because you learn how to cope with these sort of things and adjust and things like that. But when you get to a certain bit, and everybody's having 3, 4, 5 players having off day, it has a big impact on it. So as teams, that you're trying to constantly work out how to overcome that and how you make sure that all of you have a little bit of 1 millimeter, because then it becomes 15 millimeter.
100%. So where can we find you now? What are you up to, and work and everything else? What are you doing?
So when I left the Royal Air Force in 2001, so I had 18 years in the Royal Air Force. I flew for 18 years. I got 3,000 hours flying jets at low level. That was a fun job. Finished playing rugby in '99 and utilised those 2 experiences of my life around sport at the highest level, playing in team sports, being a part of the Royal Air Force and what goes with the discipline, etc. That goes into flying jets. Pulled those 2 things together and have spent the last 20 years. Crikey, what date is it today? We're in July. So the 15th of June last month, 20 years ago, I graduated from Cranwell. So that's how long ago it was. Flipping at 20 years. I don't know if the time's gone. 18 years in, and I've done 20 years out. It seems, you know, a long time. So the last 20 years, I've got involved in the corporate world, in businesses, and very much I'm passionate about teams, as you can imagine. The whole context of how do you get individuals working in teams, and also how do you get teams working with other teams within organizations. And I've set up a company when I left the military, and then now I'm on my current guise as wingman, very much around how do you get all the people and teams and organization to work much more effectively. The main premise being that most people think about, I just do my job and that's it. But sometimes don't think about my job of one in amongst 50, 500, 5,000 people. How do you get all those people working together? And also, you know, from a teamwork point of view, a lot of this work's done on a team, but actually, what about the teams within an organization? So I've blended those 2 concepts in the whole context of how do you blend the whole idea of how I do from a commercial perspective, but at the same time, how do I do it from a cultural teamwork perspective? How do I get those 2 things together to get the best out of the business? And so very much, you know, as businesses grow, they always have interesting challenges with more people becomes more complex. More people, you need to manage them. So you have levels of management as you grow as a business. All those things start to create drag factors in business. And so very much my business now is around how to get people to identify what those drag factors are, how to put things in place, both from a process as well as a knowledge and skill set point of view, to overcome those. So it makes the growth journey so much more easier. So that's my day job. It's been interesting the last year, obviously, during the lockdown, as most things you know, but we're doing fine at the moment. We're growing out of it really well, and looking forward to the next few years as we come out of the lockdown and business start getting back into the realms. Because at the end of the day, people still need investing in, and that's the biggest side of things. Yeah.
100%. Rory, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Hayley.
It has been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.